Good day everyone, I am Jalil, this is A. Lamandat, and I am from Group 3. So I'll be talking about the country of Germany. So the country of Germany is a federal republic, so it is composed of 16 states. Yes, and let's go back to the topic. Let's talk about the German literature. So German literature comprises those literary texts written in German language. This includes the literature written in Germany, Austria, German part of Switzerland, and the lesser extent work of the German diaspora. German literature of modern period is mostly Standard German, but there are some currents of literature influenced to the greater or lesser degree by dialect. Um, the early blooming of German literature is in the Middle High German, so it is a period in High Middle Ages. So the modern literature in German begins with the authors, so which is classified as the Enlightenment authors. So one of its example is Herder, and it reaches the classical form at the turn of 18th century. So next is the periodization. Periodization is not an exact science, but the following list that contains the movement or the time period typically used in discussing German literature. It seems worth nothing that the period of medieval German span only 2 or 3 centuries, and those are in early modern German literature spans 1 century, while those in modern German literature spans 1 or 2 decades. So next is the Old High German. So it is classified in 3 periods. First is the Old High, second is the Middle High German, and third is the Middle Low German. So first is the Old High German. Old High German is the earliest stage of German language. It is covering from around 500 to 1050 AD. Coherent written texts do not appear until the second half of 8th century, and some treat the period before 700 AD as prehistoric. And the date that starts the Old High German is in proper 750, maybe for that reason. There are, however, a number of elder Plutarch inscriptions dating to the 6th century, notably Forzenbacher, as well as single word and many names found in Latin texts predating the 8th century. Next one is the Middle High German. It is the term used for the period in the history of German language between 1050, it is the end of Old High German, until 1350. It is preceded by Old High German and followed by early New High German. In some uses, the term covers a longer period going up to 1500 AD. So next is the Middle Low German. So Middle Low German and the Middle Dutch areas in the north are not covered by MHG or the Middle High German. So that's why it's called the Middle Low. So while there is no standard MHG, the prestige of the Hohenstaufen court gave rise in the late 12th century. It is to the supra-regional literary, so language based on Swabian and Alemannic dialect. However, the picture is complicated by the fact that modern edition of MHG or MHG texts have a tendency to use normalized spelling based on the variety, which makes the written language appear more consistent than it actually is in the manuscript. It is uncertain whether the literary language reflected supra-regional spoken language of the court. But it has important development. So in this period, one of its development is the eastward expansion of German settlement beyond Elbe Saale line, which marked the limit of Old High German. This process started in 11th century, and all East Central German dialects are a result of this expansion. So next is the German Renaissance. So it is part of the Northern Renaissance. So it is a cultural and artistic movement that spread among German thinkers in 15th and 16th century. It originated from the Italian Renaissance in Italy. It was the result of German thinkers who traveled all the way to Italy to learn more and to become inspired by the Renaissance movement. So the German Renaissance pushed the classical thinking arts and the natural science to the forefront during this period, thinking with Germany. This also made scientists focus more on energy, on the world around them, and focus less on the heavens. This was major turning point in the history. So as we all know, the continent of Europe, we focus on kanang mythology or kanang theories, which is kanang verbal passings of human. Next is the methodology and ideology. So the greatest mark of the Renaissance was the renewed interest in classical learning. It is kanang documents, papal or not, were being brought to the surface for examination and study. Classical learning and study was must for any person. If you are living in the Renaissance, it was considered a great part of one's education. So the basis of literature and the art in this time were references back to time in ancient Greek and Roman societies. The basis of the natural science developed from the same look back into Greek and Roman philosophies and teaching. However, they were more developed. One thing to remember, it is the transition back to classical learning did not happen in few years. So the transition itself or the evolution itself took years to occur with Germany. During this period, many artists, scientists, and men of church traveled to Italy. They brought back the ideas and helped thrust Germany into Renaissance. So the greatest influence of the German Renaissance are marked for having brought the basis of Italian Renaissance thinking, while still retaining the German culture. So there are some influential person in German. Maybe they contribute a lot in the German literature. So one is Johannes Gutenberg, so widely considered the most influential person within the German Renaissance. It is time during 1398 to 1468. Next is Johann Reuchlin. She is the most important aspect of the world culture teaching within the German at this time. So this time is around 1455 to 1522. Next is Heinrich Böll. So this man never joined the Hitler Youth. So he received the prize in 1972 for helping revitalize the German literature. So he has a lot of peace. It is time during 1917 to 1985. Next period is one of the most fertile times in German literature. It is the Baroque period. It is named 16,000 to 1720. Many writers reflected the horrible experience in 30 Years' War in poetry and prose. So it is written in famous novels. So in this period, which is the Baroque period, one of it is the Emile Chaucin's Adventure of the Young, Naive Simplicissimus, Simplicissimus, and Caspar von Lestin. It all reflected tragedies in German. They say it's erotic, religious, and occasional poetry appeared in both German and late Latin. This is the 19th century, which I already mentioned earlier. It is the Weimar Classicism. So it's a cultural and literary movement in Europe, and it is central idea were originally propounded by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe and Johann Christoph Friedrich von Schiller during the period of 1788 to 1832. So next is the German Romanticism. So German Romanticism was the dominant movement of the late 18th and 19th centuries. German Romanticism developed relatively late compared to its English counterpart, which coinciding in its early years with a movement known as the German Classicism or Weimar Classicism. It opposed. So in the contrast to the seriousness of English Romanticism, the German variety is notable for valuing humor and the wit as well as beauty. This is the 21st century. So German being a relatively small language in comparison to English, much of contemporary poetry in the German language is negotiated in literary magazines. So for instance, has featured German poetry from Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and Luxembourg for the last 20 years since 2013. It is also has an English language version. So that's their one deal. Thank you for listening. That's all for my report.